lot of people are not good at just processing. Not only because it's not something that's taught, but also because of the tension that has to be held in the midst of processing. If there's one thing about your boy that has always been a challenge for me, is seeing people I love be in such a state of pain, be in such an extreme state where like it just, there's nothing that they can do. When it comes to processing stuff, man, safe spaces are needed, and safe spaces are created by safe people. Always turned off by somebody telling me that, hey, it's going to be okay, it's not that bad. The cliche comments that people might respond to hardships, difficulty, challenges with. And even though they mean well, it's hard to receive because it actually is dismissive. One takeaway that I've grabbed that I think is really important if you want to learn how to process your emotions properly, and by way of processing your emotions properly, be able to process the emotions of others properly as they come to you, is by being honest. I think you really can't grow into holding space with other people if all you're going to do is listen to respond instead of listening to contain. Family, what's happening with you? Welcome back to another episode where you and I are just processing in real time, having real conversations, having healthy conversations, processing things, building happy, healthy, whole relationships, and doing them the right way. It's your boy, Sean Walker, aka Coach Sean, in the building. I'm just excited. First and foremost, hope y'all are catching the vibe. I really do. You know, we sit on the couch welcoming into the space. This is you and me talking, so we're going to be as raw as we want to be in these conversations. But of course, I'm wearing a lot of sweatshirts. I mean, this is just me, fam. Like, I'm a sweatshirt, hoodie, sweats kind of guy. Like, obviously I'm learning. Let me say it like that, right? I'm learning to put the right fits together when I need to go somewhere and when I need to look fly. It's coming along. I'm liking what I'm feeling. But man, like these kind of stepman bros, hoodies and sweats, fam. I don't know about y'all. I mean, I'm kind of recording this. It's February. It's cold. It's like cold weather out there tonight, and it's typically cold in this crib. So yeah, I mean, call me crazy. I actually need my heating pad over here. But I'm afraid I might fall asleep. So anyway, I digress. It's so good to see your wonderful face in the place. And today's conversation is actually just it might kind of bounce all over the place a little bit, but this is going to stem from a call that I was a part of tonight. That's now kind of becoming just a weekly Bible study group that I'm a part of, an additional one on top of other spaces and communities I'm a part of, and I'm looking to attend to and remain planted in regularly, just with a group of men. And you know, I think one of the things that is so interesting in light of everything that we're doing here in this setup, in the space that we're creating, is just processing. Like that term, I promise you, has been ringing in my ear really since like maybe the second to last year of college I was in. I definitely was in a crossroads at that time, thinking I was going to drop out, turn to content, kind of go my own route, do my own things. And, you know, at that time I was afraid of making the decision. I was extremely indecisive. I even told my parents and went to length to say that God was talking to me and telling me to leave. Yeah, wasn't it? Missed it completely. So I stayed. Like, long story short, I stayed. And I don't regret that decision because of so much that I experienced in school. That, not to say school is the only place I could get it. However, it was just where I was, and I learned a lot from it. A lot of relationships, connections, and methods of communication with the degree plan that I went after. But sidetracking all of that, I think in that same season, I was really just impatient. Impatience was something that was huge on me, something that had never really been, you know, I won't say never, actually, patience had never really been my virtue. I think if you ask anybody around me from childhood up to now, you know, they would probably tell you, yeah, patience has never been really Sean's virtue. And even though it's definitely gotten a lot better, I've grown so much in it, it's still a work in progress. And, you know, I think one of the things that is difficult for us as believers to do, Of course, me coming from a biblical background, maybe you don't come from that, and that's completely cool. Stick around for the conversation. I think this is still going to be helpful for you, because you're welcomed here too. Uh, I think from the worldview that I stem from, man, is a lot of people are not good at just processing. Um, Not only because it's not something that's taught, but also because of the tension that has to be held in the midst of processing. Because there's a part of you that kind of wants to have an answer. There's a part of you that is seeking out an answer. There's a part of you that is having a lot of emotions run through your body. And so you can easily place yourself in a dysregulated space where you're allowing your emotions to turn into a tailspin, and they're no longer the aux cord that is informing or putting a flavor or melody to the car ride. It is now becoming the driver to the whole entire vehicle. And so there's so much happening when you're processing stuff. And I think if there's something that I was reminded of tonight in tonight's Bible study call, was that I know for me, it's easy to want to give an answer and to want to give something that soothes somebody's experience. Because if there's one thing about your boy that has always been a challenge for me, is seeing people I love be in such a state of pain, be in such an extreme state where like it just, there's nothing that they can do. There's nothing that they can do to change the matter. And there's everything in them that just wants to. That could wish that the pain goes away, the depression goes away, the anxiety goes away. Really heartbreaking information that takes place from marriages being separated, relationships ending. And there's always been that part of me. And I really think too, it's a part of my nature as a man, right? I think, if there's one book I would encourage you guys to check out is Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And I think it helps us really understand the dichotomy between men and women, the differences between the two, the nature between the two. And I think it's a really informative book. They also have a workbook and stuff like that. I didn't go that deep. I just grabbed the audiobook, and it blessed my life. And it was refreshing to just listen to that stuff, although I had already had somewhat of a grasp. It just took me deeper. And one of the things that I've learned us as men have the capacity to do is to be fixers. Like, just trying to fix everything, correct everything, and make everything better. And in moments where no matter what we try to do, it doesn't fix the situation, we feel helpless. We feel like this is really getting bad. And because there's nothing I can do, we can easily fall into the same emotional depression, emotional sorrow, or just emotional chaos and dysfunction. And now, instead of being able to lead and be that person that others can lean on and be that person that can hold space for others, there's just a lot of emotions taking place. And I want to preface this by saying this too, because I do think, on one hand, us as men have to be willing to step into those spaces and lead by being emotionally aware, emotionally intelligent enough to not just read a room, but be able to hold space, right? Like, and at the same time, also be able to acknowledge our own feelings, right? Like, because we're human beings too. So there's always that tension of, well, how do I make room for what I'm feeling, be vulnerable with what I'm feeling, but at the same time know that I'm supposed to be the one that's leading in that around my family, around people that I love, around my community, around my friendships, around people who really don't have the tools that I'm equipping to become more emotionally intelligent. Man. And so, as much of a good question that is, I think sometimes we can overthink it, because it's not like we have to give up one to do the other. I don't know if I've really been in a situation yet in this point in my life, granted, with the experiences I've had and also knowing tons of experiences I have yet to have. But just with where I'm at, I don't know if I've really had an experience I could point to where I said, yo, yeah, I had to put down what I was feeling in order to make room for what somebody else is feeling. I will say that there can be moments where it's delayed, or maybe it's something that is paused, but it's not something that's buried. And I think there's a complete difference. When you pause your emotional experience in order to understand the emotional experience of others, you are allowing others to really, you're giving them the floor first, right? You're giving them the mic first. You're giving them your ear first. You are serving in that manner, being friendly, being reflective, mirroring what's happening, especially if it's a conflict that you and that person are experiencing together, right? Like there's that peace of mind, or I'll say that there's that position that's taking place where you're being willing to serve in that manner. But that doesn't mean that you are shoving your stuff to the side and convincing yourself that it doesn't matter, because I think it does. It just means it's just like, maybe in this very moment, I'm not as emotionally dysregulated as maybe my partner, the person I'm talking to, my friend, my coworker. And so I actually have the capacity to put my expressions on pause in order to make room for the person that really needs to process this a little bit more, because there's a little bit more to what they're experiencing and feeling. Whereas when you bury it, you convince yourself that it doesn't matter. You internalize, and your emotions now become something that you slowly disassociate with. And we have to be careful with that dissociation or depersonalization. So I'm going to use these terms here, and I want you guys to be familiar with them, because they're going to be used often in our conversations, because it's just describing how the body works and how the brain is programming our body to respond to certain traumas. And when I define how I define traumas, it's just simply emotional wounds. And so, or emotional craters, right? I kind of like that term craters a lot, because it definitely, there's a lot of things that happens in our experiences that creates holes in our soul that need healing, that need restoration, and that put us in places where we have to establish things that possibly we never really knew were even an issue until we got to certain stages in life where we could now hold containment for the information we're gaining that's helping us be reflective of where we came from and the struggles we're enduring. So with that being said, when we go to depersonalization versus dissociation, these are therapeutic like terms, and this is all actually helping us understand why individuals operate the way they do when it comes to dealing with something that's emotionally heavy and an emotional wound. Depersonalization is somebody basically experiencing something outer body, versus dissociation, where they have completely disconnected from their body as a means of dealing with certain traumas and emotional experiences. Okay. So someone who's disassociated has disconnected from their body, and their brain in some way, shape, or form has stepped into a place of the original programming of coping with a certain experience. So for example, if as a child, when your parents were yelling, arguments were happening, and it got extremely intense, to the point where you may have even thought that there's a possibility that something abusive is taking place. How you dealt with that as a child, because you could not find safety in the same individuals that were causing the chaotic environment, you found something that you grew into being, you how am I trying to communicate this? You found something that helped you cope with that moment as a means of survival. So if it was zoning out and tuning out the noise, if it was you turning to stress eating, if it was you blasting music, right? So you couldn't hear the background noise, or turning up the television if you had a television in your room, right? Whatever that may have been for you in that space, right? As a means of surviving through those emotional roller coasters, stay with you through your adulthood. And so maybe it's no longer the parents that are doing the yelling. Maybe it's no longer the parents in the home that are on the brink of abusive situations. But now it is you being in a very extreme disagreement and argument with your significant other or with a friend in your home. And so when the argument is happening and voices are elevated, you're taken back to where you were as a child. And so your way of dealing with a very emotionally dysregulated or an emotionally charged conversation is by zoning out, tuning out, shutting down, and coping with that as a means of getting through that experience. But what's crazy is your body is taking you back to how you operated in that as a kid. Dissociation could actually be a way of numbing, right? So somebody who, when they are experiencing an emotional wound, an emotional traumatic experience, how they cope with it is they drink, right? They're turning to drugs. They're turning to sex. They're turning to pornography and masturbation. They're turning to business and busy work, right? All these different kinds of things. They don't always have to be as extreme as strong addictions, as much as it is, hey, I'm just participating in a certain behavior and activity. And deep down, the means of me doing this is so I don't have to sit with my own thoughts and deal with the emotions that are coming up in my body. What does all this have to do with what we're talking about in this exact episode? Well, I think it's just pretty simple that we have to give room for people to process things. And I think it is a difficult thing to do because there's a part of you that wants to give an answer, and there's a part of you that is trying to unpack and put words to what you're feeling, hoping that the space you're given is one that's reciprocated or reciprocal in that same manner. And so when it comes to processing stuff, man, safe spaces are needed, and safe spaces are created by safe people. And if I can't be a safe person for you to process these things, one, it's important that you connect with somebody you feel safe with to do those things, because it may not always be me. And I don't think I should walk around expecting it to always be me. But I should be somebody who, when it happens, I'm grateful for it. I receive it, and I don't take it for granted, because vulnerability is a gift. And not only should I aim to be a safe person who therefore can create safe experiences, but I have to be willing to hold space and contain and not be so quick to give an answer to certain things. And I think this all just stems from the conversation that I had tonight. And there were so many thoughts that were being granted to people who were just sharing their thoughts, sharing where they're at, sharing where they're coming from, a lot of struggles that they're enduring, lack of patience, frustration. They're at the end of their rope. It's at the point where it's like, yo, I don't know what else to do. And I'm tired of this being my reality. And it's like, it gets deep, and maybe you can think of some experiences you've had where you've been in similar spaces and you're like, yeah, bro, like it's up. And it's crazy. Like, I don't even necessarily, well, of course I'm going to use my recent example, but I mean, there's plenty of times I've had conversations with people, friends at one point or another in the season of life, where getting to know more of where they are and what they're feeling, it was so interesting hearing their responses. Like, yo, bro, like every time I talk to somebody, they always have an answer for me. And I never even asked. So it's that unsolicited advice thing that becomes a struggle as well, right? And this is all stuff that we're trying to navigate and actually unpack in the midst of processing. And so, of course, it just goes, it goes in different directions. Hey, yeah, I'm always given an answer and I don't need an answer. So I'm always turned off by somebody telling me that, hey, it's going to be okay. It's not that bad. The cliche comments that people might respond to hardships, difficulty, challenges with. And even though they mean well, it's hard to receive, because it actually is dismissive. Like, and it's unintentional at times, but it's dismissive, because I don't really think you heard what I said. I don't really think you made room for what I said. And it sucks, because I don't really feel like I have a space to process it and unpack it in a healthy way. And instead, all you do is be like, man, that's crazy. Like, how many times do we see those reels on social media where when a guy says that's crazy, like, you probably should just stop talking. And the reason why, even though it's an ongoing joke, there's truth in it, because oftentimes somebody giving you those code languages is them trying to communicate with you that they don't care, or that they're not present enough to hold space for what you're sharing. And they don't want to kind of continue the conversation going because they just don't want to make room for it in some aspects. And so they're like, yeah, I'm good on all that. And so how can we process with other people properly? How can we actually process not just with other people properly, but how can we process our own emotions properly? And I really love that, because I think, there's plenty of scriptures that I think comes to mind in this entire conversation that I think could actually guide us into learning how to properly process our emotions and process with other people with where they are. And I just think I looked through at the book of Psalms, from the first chapter to the last. It's David lamenting, praising, worshiping, reflecting, but a worshiper at heart, through who he is, an author of the percentage of the Psalms, I guess I should say. And then, of course, there's a mixture of other authors as well throughout the book. But it's just full of lamenting. It's full of David really expressing where he is, being honest about where he is, and allowing God to be experienced in a way that maybe David hadn't yet experienced God. And that is seeing him as one who actually makes room for my anger, one who actually makes room for my sadness, one who actually makes room for my grief, one who actually makes room for my disappointment, even if it's all with him. God's still making room for those things. And so that's one place that I would reference it. I think about Job, and I try not to touch too much on Job just because it's a very, very extremely strong book when it comes to suffering. And but I will express this much from Job, that one thing we see through reading the book is Job is struggling and his friends are coming with answers. And when Job begins to respond to his friends, it's a struggle, because they're coming with trying to figure out why he's in it. And Job, on the other hand, is just expressing what he's feeling while he's in it. And so you got somebody trying to give an unsolicited answer to something that wasn't asked. And you got somebody who's trying to communicate where they are and how they feel to somebody who's trying to wait to hear the right thing, or a specific word, a specific phrase, to then feel like they are given the clearance to speak something over that person that they believe they need to hear. Now, I want to preface all of this by saying, or this specific part by saying, I do think that the Holy Spirit can prompt our hearts to say certain things. I think that's why our willingness to remain in prayer, have a prayer life, study life, all those kinds of things are important, because those are what actually prepares us for those moments when God might just want to drop something on us to share to somebody that we're in the midst of conversation with, who's expressing a lot of what they're dealing with. And there's also times where we just don't need to give an answer. We just need to be present. And part of processing is learning how to build and nurture the gift of your presence and allowing your presence to be enough. And something that Job's friends didn't quite get. And I think in a lot of ways, if we're being honest, if we read through that text, we are actually more reflective of Job's friends, because we are the ones meaning well and wanting to see other people get out of the pits and ruts that they're in, try to give them an answer to what they're feeling. And sometimes it's just like, yeah, I just need to actually really just walk with you. I just need to walk with you and not try to solve it for you. And so as I think about that, and I think about the conversation I had tonight with these amazing men, and listening to all the input that was given, and even I stepped in and gave a thought when I thought it was appropriate, and tried to keep it as brief as possible. When I think about all my previous relationships and friendships or connections, coaching spaces I've held with people going through a lot, and just needing to be able to release a lot of tension and emotion that they're experiencing. One takeaway that I've grabbed that I think is really important if you want to learn how to process your emotions properly And by way of processing your emotions properly, be able to process the emotions of others properly as they come to you, is by being honest. Honesty is such a lost art in today's culture, and yet is something that is so necessary, because if I can't be honest with myself about what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing, then I should not come into conversations with other people expecting them to be honest with me. And the reason why I can't do that is because I don't even know exactly what to point out authentically, due to lack of integrity and honesty with where I am. But if I were to take it a step further, I would also say this too, is that it's just easier to give advice than it is to walk it. It's easier to say the right thing than it is to do the right thing. That's why we got more TikTokers than we do disciples. We got more social media influencers than we do people who are actually following after Jesus. Because it's easier to get on a mic and say these things. It's one thing to live it. And I think ultimately we will learn of the legitimacy of who people really are over time, as life goes on and as they continue to steward where they are. But ultimately, instead of trying to pay attention to where the fruit is of other people, we have to observe our own. Like, we can easily get so caught up in projecting on the other people and correcting other people and trying to take the log out of other people's eye, when in reality, we got to be willing to do the same cleansing and rinsing over our own hearts and minds every day if we're actually going to have impact on others around us. And so, again, honesty, in other words, self-awareness about who you are, where you are, what you're doing, and where you're going, right? And I think what this looks like applicably is you just being willing to take a second as an experience happens, as emotional dysregulation is creeping up, as your heart rate is accelerating, as anxiety is trying to pick up, as your thoughts are scrambling, as different pains, different tensions start coming up. One of the things that I've learned to encourage others that I meet with and I coach and all those kinds of things is, one, grounding yourself. Okay, that's an application. And by grounding yourself, we're really just going to take a moment, literally, and sit down. Like, we got to be willing to just sit down. And when we take a second to sit down, this is actually going to give us the opportunity to be present in the moment. And as long as we're willing to be present in the moment, we're going to be able to identify all the emotions and feelings that come and go and examine them one by one out of curiosity, not out of high expectation. So, sit down. It's real quiet. And I'm going to ask myself the question, is there anywhere in my body that I'm feeling tension right now? In this moment? Oh, okay. I got some tension in my chest. It felt a little tight. Felt my heart rate kind of accelerate. Oh, I don't know, man. I got some tightness in my calf for some reason. It's kind of crazy. The more that I'm doing my body scan. Oh, okay. Real interesting. Right? That's interesting. Okay, cool. Well, what does that area being intense remind you of? Is there a specific event, a specific moment that it reminds you of? Oh, okay. Yeah. Maybe it reminds you of the assault you experienced. It reminds you of the fight you had. It reminds you of the sporting event that you participated in. It reminds you of, a certain injury that you took or that you had, a certain sickness or struggle that you experienced, whatever it was, right? Okay, cool. So I'm acknowledging that. All right, well, what do I feel around that? I'm able to go back that far and identify that. Okay, what am I feeling right now? Feeling some pain, discomfort, uncomfortability. Maybe I'm feeling some sadness, unprocessed grief. There's a part of me that still blames me for what happened. There's a part of me that still feels real shameful about what's taking place. There's a part of me that still feels like I let other people around me down because I wasn't able to fulfill what I said I would do in that moment. I feel like a failure. What are the descriptions that you're going to give to yourself? And I think what this does in terms of growing self-aware is actually give us the opportunity to put words to what we're feeling, because that's what self-awareness really encourages us to do, whether it's through audio journaling, whether it's through handwritten journaling. It just encourages us to get connected and reconnected to our emotions, our bodies, our minds, to be able to actually bring about a level of stability and stop moving in a huge bundle of chaos or controlled chaos, because we're just used to it, but it doesn't mean it's beneficial, right? So self-awareness is number one, right? I have to be honest, like, especially when you're holding in space for other people. I think you really can't grow into holding space with other people if all you're going to do is listen to respond instead of listening to contain. And I think a part of putting yourself in a position to listen to contain and make room for where they are, there could be some things that are shared in the midst of that conversation that reminds you of you, that's going to cause you to turn a mirror on yourself. And I think those are the beautiful things about creating such spaces to be self-aware and process things, because what you learn is, dang, I see a lot of me. And so now, instead of maybe coming in here, listening to a bit of the story and having my cook session ready to just throw your way, maybe I'm actually now able to participate in the conversation by actually giving you something that maybe I didn't experience myself, but I'm able to learn how to give, even if I didn't experience it myself, such as validation. Like, I'm able to give you an opportunity to be validated about what you feel, and not ignore that, not overlook that, not minimize that, but just simply leave enough room to say, yo, you've been through a lot. And I encourage you to feel that, even if it's to yourself. Like, we do this all the time for other people. What about for yourself? Wow, Sean, like, bro, you gotta be gracious to yourself, bro. You've been through a lot. Like, can we just take a second to acknowledge that you've been through a lot, man? Right? And I really want you to take that in and breathe that in and take deep breaths as you're regulating your body that way, because this is what's giving us the opportunity to process a lot of heavy stuff that maybe we didn't necessarily feel we could do before, because we didn't have the tools, or just from previous people. We learned how to deal with our emotions from our parents. Our parents just worked, right? They just went to work. They just went on, made money. That's how they dealt with their emotions. And because of that, it's spilled onto us. And now here we are in a new information age that we're trying to navigate, and emotions isn't really the best part in our department. And so this is the whole purpose of this entire conversation, is to just help us see the impact and value behind processing and what it can look like in real time. So number one is self-awareness, being honest about who you are, where you are, what you're doing, and where you're going. Secondly, I would tell you that a part of processing things is being able to get around people who have the capacity to tell you hard things. But not just get around them. It's more of getting around people you trust, who you know can tell you the truth and tell it to you in a way where you can receive it. I think I've been in and around enough people in my lifetime up to this point who are real drawn to the merciful, gracious approach to things. It's a huge extreme, because you can go either or, right? There's an extreme of huge grace where everything is okay and nothing is held accountable to. And then there's an extreme where we're quick to be so caught up in telling the truth that they can't be wrong. They can't have any inkling of being wrong. There's no room for growth. There's no room for transformation and process. And there's an extreme side where it's very religious. Very religious. I just want to tell you truth, and not actually give you a landing spot for what I'm telling you, in order for you to process it properly and actually know what to do when certain situations, similarly what you may be originally addressing, comes up. Long rant, but I hope that made sense. But what I'm telling you, though, is that if I'm willing to actually create process or be in process with other people, I have to become good at that. Like, I do. I just have to. Because how else am I actually going to be able to legitimately contain what's being held and what's being said? And so I want to give an example. Gosh, let's go to the Bible, right? I'll go to the Bible. Because obviously that's the whole purpose of our entire existence of this channel, right? We want to come back to a biblical framework and learning how to operate and do relationships the right way. Jesus used parables. Jesus' use of parables was so impactful and so beneficial, but it wasn't just for the sake of telling stories or using analogies that God used them. It was actually him sprinkling truth, something that was challenging and hard and difficult to receive and hear, in a manner of relatable stories that made sense to that culture and time, that gave them a glimpse of what Jesus was actually talking about through real life experiences that these people had as a means of meeting them where they are. So when Jesus uses the parable of the talents, and Jesus says there is a vineyard owner, I'm just going to paraphrase here, a vineyard owner who entrusts, the vineyard and those kinds of things to his servants. And he says, hey, I'm going to come back after a time to come, or I'll say it like this. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of something completely different. Let me back up for a second. Forgive me, y'all. So when I think about the talents and the individual who comes into town, and the talents is a picture of money. He's like, yo, I need y'all to go invest this, and then I'm going to come back in a set time and collect what's invested. And you had one who was trusted with 5, he turned it into 10. One who was trusted with 2, he turned it into 4. And the one who was trusted with 1, he buried it, right? And so we know the rest of the story. The owner comes back. You've been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many. He says it to the 2, the 3. And the third one, who was given 1, he's severely consequent. He's given severe consequences, right? But I want y'all to pay attention to this, because this entire story that Jesus rattles off here talks about a few things. 1, the importance of proper stewardship. 2, that what you are given according to your ability is what God deems to be able to trust you with. And it's what you have the capacity for. And God would never give you something more than what you have capacity for. God wouldn't give you something that he doesn't think you're ready to receive and you have the capacity to move in honor. Right? But then 3, right, when it talks about your gifts and talents, cultivating those things, right, that goes along with the point 2 that we just made. But then point number 3, in some way, shape, or form, this challenges the notion that this challenges the notion of lack of stewardship. This challenges the notion of lack of faithfulness. This challenges the perspective of what everybody may have initially thought faithfulness to be. There were people who were like, yo, and we see this throughout the text. People thought that richness was closest to godliness in this culture. Religious leaders are constantly convincing people that, hey, the more money you have, the more godly you become. And so that's what flips up tables when Jesus is talking about blessed are the poor. And they're like, bro, what? Right? Because in their whole minds, they're thinking, well, if you're telling us not even just from blessed are the poor statement, maybe this is a better one when Jesus says it is harder for a rich man to get into heaven than for a camel to fit in the eye of the needle. And so they're like, well, who can enter heaven? Right? Because that's challenging a programming and a notion that they typically carried. But Jesus often uses stories, parables, as a means of getting directly to the heart of struggles and situations that need truth in order to overcome. And so I'll use it like this. Here's a great analogy that I would use to further this along, because again, I think there's too many of us who are willing to help people deal with their emotions, but because we're unwilling to pour truth back into what they're feeling, we actually are just kind of creating a venting session that doesn't go anywhere else. We're just giving people room to vent, but we're not actually giving people what they need to actually build and grow. And I'm not saying there aren't moments and times where that's required. However, if every time you connect with somebody, they need a vent session, every time you talk to your friend, they need a moment to just get stuff off their chest, at some point, we got to be willing to have enough courage to step in and speak to what they're dealing with if we actually know what it is that they're dealing with and we have enough context, and of course that trust is built to share such things. But be willing to speak to those things, because something that I'm currently learning and currently wanting to grow in is being able to speak up and speak with what's being seen. Like if I see something, I got to say something. That's huge. Now it's all about a timing aspect for sure. And that's something that you grow with in time and with time as you continue to connect with people and you navigate and you listen and you learn along the way from the times you spoke up and you maybe didn't have to, and the times you spoke up and hey, it was needed, right? Like you continue to gauge that appropriately. But back to the analogy that I think is really, really helpful in this processing aspect and what we got to do. I had a dog at one point. His name was Kiko. I remember Kiko. Kiko was amazing. Phenomenal German Shepherd. Loved that dog. And I remember the time when he got sick. He was, having some worms that were showing up in his stool. That was a problem. I was like, oh, that's uncomfortable. Not okay. Well, we need to get you checked out, cuz. And so we did. And he ends up getting these pills that he has to take as part of, his regimen for the few days to help deal with whatever was happening internally. And how we would get him these pills that we knew he needed to take, although he didn't like to take them, was hiding them in something that he enjoyed. And so what we did was we got some hot dogs. We gave him his hot dogs, and he didn't mind eating the whole hot dog. He just putting his face in the bowl and going to work. And what we would do is we would mix it in, and we would stick the pill in the hot dog, and we would put it in a place where it was hard for him to see it, and he wouldn't even recognize he's taking medicine until he finished the hot dog, because all he can really taste is the hot dog he's chewing. Or maybe we mixed it in with some wet food that we gave him too. That worked as well. But the point being is that there was something he needed to receive that we knew as his owners he wasn't going to like. But because it was what he needed, we had to find a creative way for him to still digest what he needed so he could get better and not be worse and fall apart and digress. The whole point of me sharing this is that let this serve as a picture to what we need to do when it comes to connecting with people and helping them process where they are, processing their pains, processing their thought processes, processing their emotions, helping them unpack things that they can't even currently see in the moment. But more and more that we talk and the more and more that we converse and we bounce thoughts off of, we get to the core of what's being dealt with. We get to the core of actually what the real matter is compared to perhaps what was first addressed. Because I think one thing that's important to recognize is even though you may come in with an idea of how you think the conversation will go, just keep talking to them. Keep dwelling with them. Because it may not be as simple as you think. Because behind every question is a questioner who at heart is trying to get somewhere with their question that is really addressing what really is pressing on their hearts, that they need in some way, shape, or form space to contain it, space to deal with it, and space of safety to operate in, to deal with it. And so let that serve to you as an opportunity for you to reflect on, okay, dang, maybe I have been that kind of person that just, I don't got time to be making room for people and all their emotions. And it just makes me feel some type of way. I'm quick to dismiss it. I'm quick to overlook it. I'm the guy that always wants to fix it. I'm the guy that always just wants to give you an answer and go on about your day. Stop all that crying. Stop all that sobbing. Stop all that emotional tripping you doing. It's not that deep. It's not that serious. Like, no, I think there's a way that you can express the truth and express what's needed to hear, what's needed to be heard in a manner that's receivable to the person who you're talking to. And everybody's different. How one person may receive it may not be the same way that somebody else receives it, right? I think you have to move and treat people differently in that aspect where, hey, I want to speak to you according to what you feel you can best receive this as. So for some people, maybe it does take a little bit more stern directiveness to get their attention, calling them out directly and just saying it. I think that can work for anybody personally, but maybe that's the type of person. Or maybe it's more of, maybe before you start sharing some stuff and you can't really talk to them extremely directly like that, they're fresh off of something really, really challenging, and they're expressing it to you. Maybe you have to like validate them. You got to give them something good before you give them something tough. And then you finish off what you're giving them that's tough with something, another layer of something that's good, something that's nourishing, something that's encouraging and beneficial. Some people, you may not necessarily be able to give them an answer immediately as they're expressing those things. They actually need some time because they're huge empaths, and so those emotions are huge. And so they need time to hold that, contain that, process that. Like, people are different, and so you operate that based on the person that you're speaking with, based on how that person is connecting with you in that conversation in that moment. And I think a lot of that will inform you even what to say, and will inform you on if there's even anything for you to say, as much as there could be just a need for you to be present. And so that's the second thing that I really want to get over to you, is that a part of processing is being willing to tell people the truth. And a part of being willing to tell them the truth requires us to be gracious, requires us to be very, very calm in the approach, especially to extremely sensitive things. And we want to be sure that there's room enough for what's being shared to be held, and not something that's just given to you to shut you up. But we're just making room, and we're making space. And how I often like to do it too, in terms of telling truth. You know, one thing I'm getting into a greater habit of is just simply asking, hey, are you opposed to hearing this? Are you opposed to hearing some thoughts that I might have on that situation and on that perspective that you're carrying? Do you have anything, or do you mind if I share with you this really important nugget that I think could really help you with where you're at? Maybe you don't even frame it like that, and you're just like, hey, can I just hold space for you? Can I just hug you? Can I just sit with you for a second? Can I hold this weight with you for a second? Like, I think there's a lot of ways that you can introduce such a statement, such a conversation, and not be dismissed or overlooked or maybe yelled at, turned up at. Because I think that's a positive turnout that can happen, because people are creating space for people, because safe people create safe spaces. And so there's a way that you can engage in telling them the truth, or engage in wanting to tell them some stuff without crushing them, and without demeaning them, demoralizing them, tearing them down. And I think it all starts with us being willing to be that person to step in. And even if what I say, even in the calmest way, still offends you, it's not something that I have to carry, because I said what was needed to be said. And the offense that was created, especially when I'm just being obedient to what I'm being told to say, that could be something that is more on their responsibility and not maybe ours. And so just a few thoughts there, right? We want to be self-aware. We want to be the kind of person that is willing to tell them the truth, because telling truth is a part of processing. But number 3, I think the last point that I would want to give in this entire talk, again, this stuff that is just still fresh on my mind, but something I'm seeing more and more often as I'm having more conversations, more struggles that are being presented, more real life situations and decisions that are in the process of being made, and all of the emotions that come with those decisions that are heavy, that aren't easy, and can easily drown you out if you don't choose to put your focus in places that are actually pouring into you and investing into you in such seasons. I think the third one that I would say, if I really want to process emotions, help other people process emotions, is I really need you to give yourself and others grace. Oh man, I'm so glad I thought that one through. I really want you to get to a place of giving yourself and giving others grace. Give yourself grace for a few reasons. One, because this is new to you. Perhaps where you are is new to you. What you're experiencing is new to you. This is not something that you are used to, nor is it something that you knew or had a tutorial guide on how to navigate through when you first came into this world. Like, if we really were to look at your story, there's a lot of things that are missing from your life that maybe you would look at it and say, yeah, it's something that shouldn't be missing from my life. And I should have had my parents. I should have had this. I should have had this. I mean, my past should have been better than what it was. I shouldn't have been treated like that. And I shouldn't have had to go through all these things. And that all of that can be true. Just like, it can be true that, there's a part of you that feels that at blame and at fault. If I never would have said this, then maybe this person would still be in my life. If I never would have been honest here, or if I never would have said it in this way, maybe this other person would still care about me and not treat me like I'm just some piece of garbage, or like I'm just, like I'm non-existent. You play a lot of the bargaining what if game. This kind of reminds me of some details of like the stages of grief. When you get to the bargaining space, you start asking a lot of what if questions, right? This is something similar. Like, you're just really second guessing a lot. And there's a part of you that's carrying this guilt and shame because you're taking on a weight that actually doesn't belong to you. And I want to actually deal with this here for a second, because maybe many of you can identify with that guilt and shame. And I pray and hope that what I'm about to say may actually free some of you in this analogy. When you go to the airport and you travel and you pack a bag, before you get on any aircraft, you've got to get your bags checked. And a part of getting your bags checked is getting your bag weighed. And there's a maximum weight capacity to the bag and the luggage that you carry. And when you hit the maximum weight limit or you go over it, there's one of two things that you're able to do. You're either encouraged to take some things out and basically throw them away in order for the bag and suitcase to make weight, or you pay an extra fee to get it on the flight. And a lot of us, out of maybe laziness, or maybe we just look at the fee and don't think it's that big of a deal, we're so quick to and willing to pay an extra fee to take things with us that are unnecessary and don't belong to us, essentially suggesting that the extra fee is just an unnecessary cost, an unnecessary price to pay to keep things in our luggage we don't need for where we're going. And I think in this game, I was going to say in this game of life, but in this experience of life, as God is taking us through so many different spaces and seasons of our lives, different encounters, different responsibilities, different levels of stewardship, as God is growing us, maturing us, and allowing us to experience him at greater levels as we continue to dwell and do life with him, we have to learn to pack light. And if we don't pack light, we will take things we don't need and leave the things we do need behind. And I think I want you to just picture your life as the luggage that you're taking on a trip. There are some of you that this guilt and shame has been wearing you out because there's responsibilities that you've carried that actually doesn't belong to you. And maybe there's a part of you that still thinks you should take accountability for at least a specific small role you may have played in it. However, I would be better off you just taking the percentage you're owed and give like the rest that to the person that is really at fault. Like, I'm cool with you taking 5, 10%, or however much percent you feel is required at what you're dealing with, but don't take it all, because it's not all on you, right? Somebody that broke your heart when you were legitimately looking to love and you love hard, you can take the responsibility and say, hey, I would say 30, 40, maybe 40% is on me, right? Like I ignored a lot of the red flags you gave, and I ignored a lot of what you were showing in reality in hopes of what I was banking on in potential. And 60% can still be on the other person because there were certain things that they said in the midst of separating from you that you didn't ask for and yet still happened to you. Right? And so because it's the role that they played in the connection, in the relationship, in that encounter, you also got to let them hold their weight and hold their responsibilities. Even if it's not favorable, it's still something that's worth digesting. So I say all of that to say that a part of holding grace for ourselves is being willing to take accountability for our own roles and not hold on to the whole entire weight of an expectation of somebody else's doing, to pack lightly, and to pay attention to what we're packing and making sure that what we're packing is beneficial and fits the weight limit of the bag, right? I also think too, as you know, showing grace for yourself in that same process. I think in that same vein, we have to be willing to allow ourselves to process it, give ourselves time. Like it's crazy. I've talked to quite a few people over the course of just these last few weeks where I think a constant reminder that has had to be repeated is, hey, I want you to really be careful of all the expectations you're putting on yourself, because truth is, yes, you're learning a lot and it's beautiful. And it's something that we should cherish and we should take into great consideration. And we should still want to continue to learn and grow and develop all those things. Yes, beautiful. However, I don't want you to get to the place where you should think to yourself that because it's something you just learned, that it's something that you should already have completed and applied. You know, again, I'm just full of analogies at this point. Y'all rock with me. Y'all gonna get used to it here in a while. You know, when you see a train turning the corner on a train track, what leads first? The locomotive. And then, of course, as the locomotive turns the corner, all we see is the locomotive for a while before the whole train ends up being on one singular track again after turning the corner. And it's a long turn, and it takes time for the entire one cart to, one one line of carts to get on one track. And so with that same picture, I want you to think of that as you're healing, as you're reconnecting to things, as you're, rediscovering things and establishing things for the first time. It's like, yo, I'm learning so much, but I just feel so behind and I feel like I can't get it together and I feel like I should have it by now. And I don't know why it's taking so long. And I'm just really, really being the worst kind of student, the worst kind of parent, the worst kind of husband, the worst kind of wife, the worst kind of leader, the worst kind of friend, the worst kind of brother, all those kinds of things. And I just want you to take a step back and be like, dang, bro, like, where are you getting all these expectations from? Who told you that? Who told you that you're supposed to have this down packed after the first day of learning it? When a light bulb went off and you learned why you did what you did and where it came from and how it developed. Who said you had to have it all together in one day? No one. And I know for a fact God didn't, because that's just not how God operates. God operates in process. Genesis through Revelation. Process. 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 And a part of process is giving yourself the opportunity to breathe and giving yourself the opportunity to build up to the person that you're becoming as you're learning more and more in such a vulnerable and sensitive season of time. So give grace to yourself in that manner, right? Where you're very kind to yourself. You're very mindful of the words that you speak over yourself. I want you to be willing to get into a space where in your daily gratitude and journaling sessions, you're reminding yourself of who you are in God and who you are in Christ, that you are wonderfully made in Him, that you are you are redeemed, you are loved, you are chosen, you are wanted. I want you to get into those spaces where you're reminding yourself of what God speaks over you, because it's in those seasons it's easy to lean more into what you think of you based off of your insecurities and not truth. And even though the insecurity does give us a hint of truth, maybe to our experience, it doesn't mean that it's something that we have to be able to define ourselves by. It's just more of actually integrating the negative realities into the negative into our reality. Yes, this is the situation and this is my experience, and I'm still trusting God and knowing that He's got me covered. I can accept the negative thing that's taken place and the outcome of the negative thing and still not be defined by that negative thing or that wrong decision. And so, yeah, I mean, kind words to yourself, that's really helpful. Getting in spaces where you're being poured in and developed by truth, extremely helpful. And I think those are really good 3 parts to give and consider when it comes to having grace for yourself. And I think because you'll use those 3 things to have grace for yourself, it actually allows you to have grace on others a lot more easier. Sometimes we have it reversed. I'm more gracious to other people than I am to myself. Well, here's my question to you. If you find yourself saying things like, I'm more gracious to other people than I am to myself, or I'm more loving to other people than I am to myself, where are you getting this additional grace from? If you're not pouring into yourself in this manner, where are you getting it from to even give this so-called additional grace to other people, or this grace where they're just flowing in it, and here you are struggling to figure out what makes sense, and you're struggling to be encouraged, and you're struggling to give yourself time to process and heal. I really love this scripture. I've been referencing the text throughout this conversation, and I'm hoping this is resonating with some of you guys and giving you guys some really good help as you're learning to process emotions. And then, of course, as a result, as you learn to help others process where they are. This scripture is really helpful, and hopefully I can bring it up here. My brain is slowly shutting off, so I gotta wrap up here. It's crazy. I already forgot it. Oh man, help me, Holy Spirit. Help me, Holy Spirit. What is it? Oh my goodness, Lord. What is it? Oh man. Giving yourself grace. Speaking words of life over yourself. Then, of course, as you learn to do... Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Here we go. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. All right. Coming to your front door with the smoke. And we in Matthew. This is one of my favorite scriptures, man, honestly, of all the text. For a lot of reasons, but I think based off the topic that we're talking about tonight, this is one of them. Okay. Here it is. Matthew 22. And I want to start at verse 34 just for some context. Jesus says, Matthew writes this, but when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees with his reply, they met together to question him again. One of them, an expert in religious law, tried to trap him with this question: Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest command. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. So what that informs me is that, one, I already come into this world naturally loving myself. So if there's anything that is coming against this natural flow of loving myself, causing me to not love myself, we got a problem. Because that's not of God. So, and again, I think we also want to be careful too, right? We don't want to dive so deep into loving ourselves that we idolize ourselves, right? That's definitely not what God is saying. But rather it's like, okay, since I'm created in the image and likeness of God, and God finds me exceptional, God fearfully made me wonderfully, has fearfully and wonderfully made me. He sent his own son to the cross to die for me and resurrected, right? Like all these different things that we can point to in scripture that reminds us of God's love for us. This is what actually helps us see ourselves in a loving manner and in a loving light. And because we're able to see ourselves in a loving light, it now helps us to treat others in a loving way. If I don't give myself grace, I don't give myself love, I don't honor who God has designed and made me to be, then what's more likely going to happen is the willingness to tear down in others what God has made in them. It's going to cause me to spit out this nasty venom of hate and control that's only a reflection of what I feel I'm not, and I'm projecting that onto you. But here, Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. So I think a part of loving your neighbor as yourself is also being gracious to yourself, being gracious to your neighbor as yourself. I really don't know if you can give more grace than what you give to yourself. I don't know, because then I don't know if that's even grace that you're giving as much as it is just unsolicited. I think as much as maybe you could actually be giving people excuses, because grace and excuses are two different things. Grace is acknowledging what happened and saying that we're still growing. Excuses actually try to get us to neglect our responsibility and invitation to maturity in certain experiences, and in a way helps us remove ourselves from the line of fire of consequences. That might sit with you, that might not. That might be something worth investigating later on. But again, if I'm going to be willing to process with people and help them unpack where they are, I'm not always looking to give answers. I can't live in a life in a space where I'm quick to give answers or I'm only listening to give answers. Instead, I make myself available to be the hands and feet of Jesus in that space while being honest about the capacity I have, being honest about where I am, who I am, and what I'm doing. As I'm on the outside, maybe looking in or having these conversations with other people, but maybe if I'm in it myself, like I'm processing things for myself, then I'm being honest about what I'm feeling. I'm being present with what I'm feeling. And I'm able to actually identify some things the more and more I put words to it. And as I'm communicating it through audio journals, written journals, verbally, my body actually is starting to release some of the tension I'm feeling because I'm describing what I'm feeling and not trying to bury it. Self-awareness. Then, other than self-awareness, I'm actually being able to give truth and put myself in positions to receiving truth. So I'm not living in an extreme of grace where everything is excused, or we treat that as, hey, it's all good, don't even trip about it, and we do nothing about it, right? And we also don't live in the other extreme where we're just giving out truth so much that it's crushing us or crushing other people. But there is a way where we can hold the tension and live to pursue, to reflect what Jesus does as he holds the tension of grace and truth as he meets the woman caught in adultery, where they tried to trap him. Rabbi, she's caught in adultery, and the law says we must stone her. What do you say? So they don't even fully reflect the law in and of itself, and they try to trap him. Jesus is regulated here and starts writing in the dirt. He's without sin, cast the first stone. And then not only does he hold the tension through there, but he also then gives her truth in the midst of that tension. Do you see any of your accusers? She replies, no, my Lord. He says, neither do I. Now go and sin no more, right? So it's this entire picture of grace and truth. And I think that's often what we need in relationships. That's what we need as we come together in community and even live out what James 5:16 says in the midst of experiencing vulnerability and having hard seasons, trying to process stuff mentally and stuff just ain't making sense. The math ain't mathing. Maybe we're struggling with some things that we've dealt with and some shame and guilt that we're experiencing from decisions we made that maybe we're living in regret about. Maybe there's a decision we're about to make and we don't even have peace about it. I don't even know where to go. Like, just dealing with everyday things. Yes, community is needed, bro. Community is needed. And without it, we find ourselves in very dark places, convincing ourselves that we're hearing from God when really it's just our fear talking. Or there's a huge part of us that just straight up turns everything off. And we don't even put ourselves in the right lanes and spaces to actually get what we need, the nourishment we need to keep going, to be restored, to be refreshed. And moving forward in the right direction is becoming more and more of who God has designed and called us to be. So just to recap, if I'm going to process my emotions, how to process my emotions, I want to give you, these are the 3 things. Self-awareness, being honest about who I am, where I am, what I'm doing. Putting myself in spaces and vicinities of receiving truth and being the one to communicate truth to others in the midst of what they're feeling. And doing so in a gracious way. And then thirdly, we also have to give grace to ourselves and to others in the process. One of the things that us as church goers, people who are used to church experiences, are very familiar with is testimonial service. And as beautiful as testimonial service is, what we can easily do is find ourselves moving in a way where we're convinced that, this person needs to have a testimony by X amount of time in order for other people to know that God is doing good work. God is still healing. God is still doing miracles. When in reality, there's miracle in the progress. I think that's going to be the title of this episode. Miracles in the progress. Miracles in the process. Let me say it like that. I like that better. Miracles in the process. Maybe you aren't where you're exactly where you were a few years ago, but you are further. And that in of itself is a miracle. Maybe you aren't all that you think you should be at this age and stage, but can we at least put ourselves in positions to celebrate where God has us? Can we at least put ourselves in positions where we're willing to celebrate how far God's brought us? The transformations that God has already done in us and through us? I know that you don't have all the money that you thought you would have. I know you don't have all the skills you thought you would have. I know you don't have it all, but you got something. And this is where our perspective shift ought to change, where we're not resting in these spaces of lack, but we're focusing on abundance through being grateful and practicing daily gratitude. Because this also is what helps us to be able to process things effectively as well. Because now I'm able to really put my mind to the right places and not just allow it to be in a sunken ship. But I can actually allow my thought processes to be effective. So, lest I keep you guys any longer, again, just to recap, how do I process my emotions? How do I help others process their emotions? How can I actually honor, process, and healthy relationships? And crash courses of building healthy relationships. Well, we got to be honest about our capacity. We got to be honest about where we are, who we are, what we're doing, and where we're going, what we're feeling as we're processing our own emotions. We're helping others process theirs. And then not only do we need self-awareness, but we also need truth. We can't overextend in grace and we can't overextend in truth. We need them both, grace and truth. And it's truth, just a little bit of truth through how it's delivered and how it's received, parables, stories, examples, connections, relatability. It's the importance of being able to put ourselves in position to receive the truth that's actually going to do the transformative work in us. Can't tell y'all how many times there are plenty of people. I have literally coached somebody who had spent time in therapy that didn't get nowhere near what we discovered in a few calls. I don't say that to brag. I say that because it's real out here that there are people who are trying to rob other people of their money just for the sake of getting a flow of income and trying to keep you in a healing space, when in reality, all you need is a few course corrections to get going. And we can honestly put ourselves in those positions where we're leaning so heavily into talk therapy and things like that, that we're just coming to a therapist for vent sessions and actually not walking out of there doing something that's helping us grow. So that way we're not in the same position in 6 months like we may be now. Because that's what real work takes. Effort. Like, I shouldn't be dealing with the same struggles if I'm been in therapy, coaching, counseling spaces for years at a time. I think there's got to be some level of growth and progress that allows us to see that what we're putting together and what we're applying actually works. I think the same way goes here, right? So, truth is what gives us the opportunity to be transformed, right? And grace in truth is what gives us the opportunity for us to receive the truth in a helpful, healthy way. And this also reflects in the relationships we give. Hey, how you communicate to somebody in the midst of the most sensitive spaces that they're experiencing matters. Sometimes it's more than just what you say, it's how you say it. Two things can be true. You said the right thing. What you said wasn't wrong, and how you said it is what kept them from being able to receive it. So what do we have to do? We got to check our emotions at the door, fam. I know it's easy to make it about us. I know it's easy to match energy. They want to yell, I'll yell. They want to get mad, I'll get mad. They want to cut up, I'll cut up. They ain't seen nothing like me around these streets. I'm good. When in reality, we got to get to the heart of what is actually showing up on the surface and be curious enough to know how can we team together to get to the common goal that we want out of this relationship, and not say you've become my enemy and they've become my enemy because we're not seeing eye to eye and we're not being in agreement. Well, no, I think we got to be curious. And then if we want this relationship to be nurtured properly, it takes work. And a part of taking work is saying, hey, I want to be more intentional with how I'm talking to you, in the voice inflection in which I bring to you when there's a problem or when we're just having conversation. I want to get to know you to the point as a friend, or even if we're talking about something like, please don't just think that this is just towards relationships that you're dating romantically, bro. These are for all your relationships. Your entire relationship space would just be healthier if we learned how to communicate with people when they're processing things, and when they're experiencing hurts and pains, and when they're experiencing challenging seasons, or when they're experiencing something that maybe we could have seen coming a mile away and they still wanted to do their own thing. How you respond to people is just as important as what you're responding with. And there are times for directness and sternness. There are times for difficult approaches. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's about finding that proper balance. And again, being mindful of who needs it most and who you're talking to, and knowing that we might have to approach people differently in order to get great results. But some of us would actually just have healthy relationships if we just shut up. If we just stop. If we just stop talking. If we just stop putting our foot in our mouth. If we just stop saying things that don't need to be said. If we would just stop for a second and just ask ourselves, okay, before I say this, because I said it before and it doesn't seem like anybody heard me, so I'm instinctively inclined to say this again. Before I say it again and maybe make the same mistake twice, does this need to be said? Okay, maybe this is a thought that came to mind, and maybe this isn't the right place to say it. Is this something that actually is relevant to the conversation and is needed to be shared? Or is this just me trying to stroke my ego? Is this just me trying to deflect? Is this just me trying to become the center of attention? Like, man, I'm telling y'all, when y'all are able to grow in this space of being self-aware in the moment, in real time, ooh, you'll catch stuff on the fly. And you'll be like, oh, snap. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Let me slow down. But that all comes with time and repetition. Repetition, consistency, discipline, routine, wash, rinse, repeat. Losing count here. Wash, rinse, repeat. That stuff will change your life. You'll be amazed at how your relationships are out in a whole lot better space all across the board. But it takes us being willing to create safe spaces and be safe people in order to do that. And it takes repetition. It takes hearing hard things. It takes allowing ourselves to be in positions where we're willing to process our own emotions. Because I can't find myself trying to regulate other people's when I'm allowing myself to live dysregulated. That don't make sense. That's out of alignment. That's hypocritical. But what I can do is, as I'm processing my stuff and I'm learning how to do that, I can spit game to other people, pour into them, and help them process their things by raising questions, being curious, and not forcing them to be a certain way in order for me to just be present and allow my presence to speak volume. And giving them what they're needing in that moment. I think one of the best things that you can do too, when it comes to processing is, and I just thought about this as I'm closing up here. One of the things that we don't do often is just ask people, what do they need? What do you need from me right now? What do you need from me in this conversation? What do you need from me in this season of friendship, relationship, connection? What do you need from me? Because this skill will for sure keep us from giving unsolicited advice, saying unnecessary things, all from a place of meaning well, but yet it can still hurt because it wasn't necessary. But when we ask, hey, what do you need from me right now? Now this gives me an idea to know what to share, if anything. Now this gives me information to know how to show up as a better friend, coworker, leader, father, husband, wife, son, daughter, cousin, nephew, best friend. Gives me an opportunity. Gives me an opportunity to do that. And I think this also kills that notion of like, hey, if he wanted to, he will kind of aspect. And I get it too. Like, I don't want to turn this into a whole dating conversation, but I think on one hand, it can be true that yes, I think a man who's considerate and desiring, and a woman who's very considerate and wanting to create a healthy relationship can put herself and themselves in positions to do things without being asked. And how there's also a spectrum where it's like, well, how do I even know if you don't even tell me? Like, we just think we're just supposed to do these things off the wall. I'm just supposed to read your mind. You're supposed to read my mind. Nah, fam, I think there's power in communication. And I think it just hits different when it's something that's shared and then it's acted on compared to you being upset because they didn't guess that what you wanted was what you wanted. Now we got a whole silent argument taking place where we're silently at a standoff and disagreeing. And the relationship is silently falling apart because of something that just was not communicated. I'm going to leave that alone. But yeah, I think if we put ourselves in position to where we ask what's needed, gosh, saves us a lot of time and allows us to know better how we can show up in spaces where we need it. But then finally, of course, all this being a part of the wrap up, be gracious to yourself and be gracious to others, and be reminded that God has given you the grace to be where you are. You're not laden behind, and that God's grace is sufficient. And the same grace that's given to Paul, the same grace that's covering over Christ, that resurrects him from the grave, the same grace the same grace by which we're saved by and not by our own works, is the same grace that's available to us to allow us to be in process and allow things to take time. Some of these things just take time. Seed plus time, or seed plus dirt plus time equals healthy relationships, right? Some of these programmings that you've got that are causing you to conflict with what the scriptures are saying takes time. You overcoming some of those emotional wounds that have had you and convinced you to think one way about yourself that you're now recognizing isn't as healthy takes time to break away from. We got Bible for this. Israel is delivered from Egypt in a moment. God splits the sea in a moment. They're in oppression and in slavery for 400 years. God delivers them. But it takes God some years to get Egypt out of them, because the mental and emotional wounds that they incurred in such a time of generation upon generation upon generation of enslavement, that takes some time. Now, here's how amazing God works. God doesn't need the same amount of time you were in bondage in order to deliver you mentally and emotionally. However, that doesn't negate the fact that it takes time. So please take your time, be patient, and allow yourself the opportunity to grow into these spaces as new information is poured into you, perspective shifts are given to you, challenges are offered to you that are helping you change the way you see things, that are helping you realign yourself with your values and with what's most important in order to do relationships the right way and in order to navigate your emotions in a healthy lane to become a healthy person. That's it, y'all. I'm done. Y'all gonna get sick of me in these long pods. But this stuff is worth unpacking because this is what we're here for, to process stuff. And I think if there's one thing that we all may need a little bit more of, it's patience with one another and spaces to process with one another. And I think if we are able to give more of that by becoming those kinds of people that are willing to offer those and create those spaces, we'll be better off. And I think we'll have an opportunity to impact a whole lot more people than we realize over time. Because you just don't know what your presence can really do for somebody that's going through. I don't even know if I can say it again like that in the same way. And I ain't never said it like that before in my life. So I'm going to just leave it there. I appreciate you guys so much for tuning into this episode. I can't wait to continue to unpack things, have more discussions, conversations, as we're here to continue to heal, do the healing work, and build happy, healthy, whole relationships, doing relationships the right way, which starts with us doing the healing work on ourselves first. And obviously creating healthy biblical relationships with ourselves, with others. That all starts with having a relationship with God. So I appreciate you guys so much. And until our next conversation, hey, be easy and be breezy, my friend. Hey, peace.